Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Supreme Court hears Montgomery County opt-out case, Marc Elrich's development veto, and Elrich proposes across-the-board increases in county income taxes. And exactly how is Kilmar Abrego Garcia a Maryland man? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher, and former County Council member and CEO of SkillSmart, Mike Knapp. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. At the start of the 2022-2023 school year, Montgomery County Public School System began introducing LGBTQ inclusive books as required reading in its elementary schools. Initially, the county school board allowed parents to opt out their children, but in the middle of the school year, the county rescinded the policy. In response, 3 religious organizations sued the county for a violation of religious liberty, citing Wisconsin v. Yoder, which held that a parent has the right, a constitutional right, to guide the religious future and education of their children. In yesterday's hearing, several of the justices focused on the fact that the books in question were not part of the human sexuality classes where opt-outs are still permitted, but rather the English curriculum for as young as pre-kindergarten. And they also noted that human sexuality classes are not even introduced until 4th grade. Mark, is there a distinction between the desire to make schools a safe place for LGBTQ plus children and the desire to use elementary schools to implement liberal social ideology?
Well, this really is a very tough balancing act. I think it was easier when you referenced the fact that when it was sex education, it was a little easier to create a carve out. It is very much more difficult for the courts to try and get into the business of figuring out what's part of the curriculum and what's not a part of the curriculum. I think this really underscores the fact that it's hard to have an educational system that is sort of one size fits all, and that that's a challenge in a large school district like Montgomery County's.
So, Mike, Justice Kavanaugh, who's a lifelong resident of Montgomery County, but admittedly did not attend public schools and did not send his children to public schools, but is a fairly reasonable person, said at one point, well,
it's probably debatable, but we can come back to that later in the program.
At one point, he said, I guess I'm mystified how it came to this. So how did we get to this point?
I think one of the real challenges, and Mark kind of alluded to this, we have representatives of every country in the world in Montgomery County. We have people from all walks of life. And I think when you're trying to create a system that it can begin to teach and expose children to the things that they're going to see every day in school, you're trying to come up with ways to build that into your curriculum because that's just what exists. We have everybody. We have 160,000 students, and you're trying to be able to demonstrate how to be respectful and civil to the different types of people that you're liable to come across in the course of the day in your school year in Montgomery County. And so I'm not surprised that Justice Kavanaugh doesn't understand how we got here, because Georgetown Prep doesn't look like that. And so, and that's, and
that's fair. But the question really is, where does the line between advocacy and teaching tolerance blur? Have we crossed that line?
But I guess there's an assumption implicit in what you're saying that what people are trying to do is to advocate for something. And I don't believe that it's an element of advocacy that they're doing. I think that what they're trying to do is, in the course of written material that they're teaching children from, is to be able to take the written material, to be able to help them read better or help them read at all, and then to be able to have that correlate to the things that they're seeing in their everyday life. And I think that that is a very challenging needle to thread when you have as much diversity as we do in this community. And so I think that's the challenge. And I think Mark said it right. That's a really hard needle to thread.
So Mark, going back to this whole concept, I think that part of the issue that affects the plaintiffs in this lawsuit was the age appropriateness of the teaching material, and the fact that it doesn't belong in the English curriculum. It belongs in human sexuality, and the current policy is that you can opt out on human sexuality as a parent and have some rights and control over what your children are exposed to. You get the last word on this.
Well, I was going to say, as you've established, that principle has been long established. It's the problem. The issue is do the courts really want to get into having to pick and choose the details of the rest of the curriculum? And it's I think one of the reasons why the plaintiffs in this case lost at the district and at the Court of Appeals level. It was very interesting the Supreme Court took up this case because it is very difficult to make those distinctions.
Well, there's another Supreme Court case coming up next week that also deals with education, and it's the Drummond case, and it may change things even more radically than the narrow decision regarding whether one should be able to opt out or not. So, Mike, you have any final thoughts before we go to the next topic? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I applaud the MCPS for trying to figure out how to engage as many of its students as possible, but it is a very challenging thing to do in a school system the size of ours. And I hope that the Supreme Court can take those elements into account. And I think Mark has raised a really good point that do you really want to be in the decision-making business for curriculum of school systems?
Well, the justices even talked about that. What's the slippery slope with respect to this decision? And, you make one decision at this level, and then how are the lower courts going to interpret it and apply it? So it's going to be, you're right, it's going to be a tricky solution. Let's go on to some of the other things that are happening in Montgomery County and trying to figure out what the heck is going on in the development community, where is a mystery to most. And this week, County Executive Marc Elrich vetoed a bill that would have provided tax incentives to real estate developers to build more housing in the county. He said it was a giveaway to the developers. 20 years worth of no taxes. How dare they? In response, Mr. Elrich is proposing to require developers to increase the number of moderately priced dwelling units, the MPDU program, in their development. Mike, it seems to me I'm not quite a layperson looking at it objectively, but that the battle between the council and the executive is just an admission by both groups that they've screwed things up so royally that they don't know how to fix it.
No, and I think that's very true. I mean, we have strayed so far from the path of how you actually build housing in our community that now we're trying to tweak things that are on the margin, on the edges, which at the end of the day, while laudable that this passed the council with the number of votes that it did, the reality is it's still just tinkering on the margin. When you're dealing with situations like, and I was just listening to a report from the Fuller Institute a couple weeks ago, Dallas, Texas has created 456,000 new jobs over the last 5 years. We've created 5,000 here. One of the big reasons that they've created those numbers of jobs is because while housing prices have increased across the country, housing is still more plentiful because they've not so completely over-regulated the process that people can actually move there, businesses can move there and relocate there and know that their employees can find housing. We are so far away from that we almost have to throw everything out and start over from scratch.
That's a great segue to Mark, because this morning on CNBC there was an economist talking about the housing market and the fact that yes, interest rates are important to the housing market, and yes, that is a key. But actually, if you want more rapid development of housing, 25% of the cost of housing is from overregulation. It's from overregulation by the counties. So as Mike just suggested, how do you save the baby when you're throwing out the bathwater?
Well, I was going to make the observation, you don't want to spend more on lawyers and lobbyists than you are on architects and engineers. And the Rube Goldberg nature of the county's system of, you can build something, but you can get a bonus if you do X or Y or Z, makes this process really much more expensive. What makes for affordable housing is when a developer can go into a piece of land and as of right decide to build something and build it relatively quickly, and so that they don't have to have the carrying cost for an extended period of time. I look around in the county, and near me, there's a project that was supposed to start years ago. It's got affordable housing as part of it, but it's been part of a very, very protracted process, which makes it all that much more expensive.
You know, a couple of weeks ago, the Post ran an article, I believe it was the Post, that talked about a development project in Tacoma Park that's been stalled for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
Now, and keep in mind, this is near a metro station. I mean, the smart growth, advocacy of Paris Glendenning would have said, build that, development. Let's build it there and see, and move forward. Mike, what happened to the master plan that we had for so many years? I mean, you saw this on the council. How do you go back? Can you go back to it?
Well, we really have to engage a conversation and get our community to understand what this looks like. If you talk to most elected folks, they will say housing, housing, housing. That's a really important issue. But when you have the discussion with communities and you're not having a candid discussion about what that can mean and what that doesn't mean, we can bring all kinds of boogeymen out of the closet and say, well, it's going to be this, it's going to be this. Unfortunately, the county executive has won on the basis of people who don't want to see development. So there's a strong base of people who don't want to see additional growth. And so when Park and Planning came out with proposals last year to actually try to engage this conversation, he immediately vilified it and got people all up in arms, as opposed to recognizing that we're tens of thousands of units behind in this community and region, and we're just not making any progress. And as a result, people can't afford to live here. You've got to have a real conversation, but you've got to put it on the table and bring people to that table and have a discussion about it in order to be able to move this forward.
Mark, last thoughts.
Well, Mike's right, and we need to recognize that unfortunately there are both winners and losers in this. The losers are the people who are priced out of the market, and the winners are the people who are homeowners, who see the increase in prices and that makes things so much unaffordable. And that's a constituency that Marc Elrich has been able to tap into.
Well, we're going to have to take a break here and buckle up, Montgomery County residents, because not only did the General Assembly approve increases in your income taxes, but now Marc Elrich is pushing an across-the-board income tax just for you. And why are Marylanders Democrat politicians fighting so hard to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia back to Maryland? Stay tuned. And welcome back. Earlier this month, County Executive Marc Elrich proposed a real property tax increase, which landed like with a thud and not much support from the county council or anyone named Mark with a C. Now, snatching defeat from the jaws of defeat, Mr. Elrich is now proposing to raise the county income tax rate to 3.3% and make it retroactive, get this, to January. So your 2025 taxes are going to go up. Mike, the proposal by the county executives, in addition to the massive tax increase passed by the General Assembly, how's the council going to react to this proposal?
Well, unfortunately, they probably will react favorably. So there are a couple issues at play. One, you've got to have a unanimous vote of the county council to ultimately get a property tax increase through. There's some wiggle room there, but rather than have that fight, the income tax doesn't require a unanimous vote. So that gives you a lot more latitude and a lot more flexibility. The other piece is that in addition to the state raising our income tax at that level, because they passed certain funding requirements back to the jurisdictions, most notably teacher retirement, they gave the counties the ability to raise their own taxes to be able to absorb that increase that they then passed on to us in addition to the increase at the state level. So it's, they gave us the tools to shoot ourselves in the foot. And unfortunately, that's what the county executive is proposing.
So are you saying we should blame Wes Moore for this?
I think what you're seeing at the state level and at the county level is an inability to understand kind of the economics that we have right now, right? If you look at the jurisdictions to our south, Virginia has a surplus, we have a deficit. If you look at, we don't know how to cut. If you look at Montgomery County, the county executive is in a box because the people who supported him have been folks who have been union oriented, and we have more workers than we had before. They're being paid more than they were being paid before. At the same time, he also knows that the economy is really being impacted by control of the federal government and having impact on businesses that he doesn't have control over, and he's stuck and doesn't know which way to turn.
So, Mark, with a K, by the way, not Mark with a C.
The right way.
It's very interesting. I listened to Mr. Elrich's statement when he talked about the increase, and there's actually panic in his voice about the fact that we don't know what the federal government is going to do, the impact that the federal government cuts are going to have on Montgomery County and the state of Maryland. And there's real, there was real fear you could sense in his voice. But here's a novel idea. Howard County, their county executive, Calvin Ball, is cutting spending with no tax hikes. And, Lord forbid that we have to cut a few programs. So do you think the council is going to respond with cuts?
Well, of course, the elephant
or pass the tax.
I say, the elephant in the room is obviously the MCPS budget. That's roughly a little over half the county's budget. And we've gotten ourselves into this, even though the enrollment is essentially flat, down slightly over the last couple of years. We've gotten ourselves into the board asks for the high rates, and then anything less than that gets defined as a cut, and it's not a cut. It's just a reduction in the amount of increase. And the council has really got to be able to take that aspect of the budget head on and address it, which is the MCPS does not need as much money as it's asking for, and they've got to make the adjustments.
Well, it just seems to me that, we've heard a lot of talk and discussion from both the General Assembly, the governor, and now from Mr. Elrich about, the impact that federal government cuts are going to have, but nobody's doing anything about it. They just sort of are kind of whistling past the graveyard. Let's hope we can kick the can down this year, and next year will be better. Any other thoughts?
Well, no, I think you're right, and I think that we've got to be very cognizant that these changes are real. They're going to have a significant impact on our economy, and that if you're not looking to try and make structural changes, it's just a matter of when you're going to get bit in the butt, not if.
And so is it going to impact the next elections, Mike? 2026 is an election year, isn't it, for most of these guys?
It is. I think it very likely may. We live here, we live in Maryland, in Montgomery County, and we tend to take these things in stride, but I think we're getting to a point where I don't think people can ignore it anymore, and I think the ballot box is where they're going to show it.
So will there be a tax revolt, Mark?
Well, there certainly will.
Montgomery County residents are going to revolt?
It's interesting because let me go back to Mike's description of the sort of incentives, if you will, or the rationale for an income tax increase. It's a perverse byproduct of the Ficker amendments that it's harder to increase the real estate tax than it is now as a result of the change that was made this year than it is the income tax. And that was always, frankly, one of the risks that we had with that.
Well, guys, that was a great discussion. I think it's going to have a major impact on 2026. And I think some of these council members and the race for county executive is going to be very interesting to watch and see what happens. But I want to go on to our last topic today. And, this is the story of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a native of El Salvador who entered the country illegally, which, by the way, is a felony and for which he can be deported. And there's no question that Abrego Garcia was found to be a member of MS-13 by an administrative law immigration judge who did order him deported. So I'm a little confused as to why we have Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen, as well as representatives going to El Salvador to fight for his release, and why so many people are fighting for the release of someone who's not really a good guy. So, Mike, you know the story. He was granted temporary legal protection by claiming he would face physical harm if he was forced back to El Salvador, his native country. So why are so many politicians fighting for his return?
I think the challenge we have is right now that what people are fighting for, I believe, is the concept of due process. The fact that here is a person who was identified inadvertently and then was basically deported amongst a group of others, and the administration acknowledged that they made a mistake in doing so. And so I think the point that you're trying to see Senator Van Hollen and others make is if they can do it there, they can do it to anybody, and they can do it anywhere. And you're seeing video across the country of people basically being taken hostage by armed bandits, if you will, who are ICE, and then being deported to places in the country and then outside the country. I think that's the orientation, is how do you focus on due process? Unfortunately, I don't know that he is the best individual to be having that due process, because to your point, it's easy to identify 4 other issues as to why is this the guy. And I think, unfortunately, we've seen in the Democratic Party a similar situation when we had the election, where the debate is around whether or not trans athletes should be able to participate in sports. And the reality is that there were 9 trans athletes in the NCAA. So we're fighting that. We have this person who we're trying to be the poster child for due process. Yes, due process is important, and there are bad examples. That should not necessarily be our poster child to demonstrate that.
Well, I agree with you about the question whether to make him the hill that you die on. I mean, he was found to be a member of MS-13 by an administrative law judge and on appeal to the administrative law board. So again, it's questionable whether he should be the target. But, Mark, the Maryland statutes say it's a crime to participate in a criminal gang, knowing that the members of the gang engage in an ongoing pattern of criminal activity. And, many argue that, we have a gang problem in Montgomery County and in the state of Maryland. So why are the politicians putting the members of a gang ahead of law-abiding Maryland residents?
Well, I think he's not exactly the poster child for the due process, but this is broadly an issue of means versus ends. And he was removed from the country contrary to law. But that said, it's not necessary to find somebody to be a criminal, to be convicted of anything, if you're removable, if you can be deported, if you're not here illegal and there's been a determination. So that's really not the standard here. Were he to be brought back, which is what Van Hollen asked for, the immediate proceeding would be to turn around and send him back to El Salvador, or where that protection that he enjoyed in 2019 to another country. This is really the wrong case to make that argument. I guess I would push back. It's not necessary to find him to be a criminal in order to have him deported.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the immigration statute, by coming in illegally, is a felony. So, and you're deportable under the immigration statute.
That's
so
not.
You don't have to find him to be a member of MS-13 to deport him.
That's actually not.
Mike, you had some. Go ahead.
I was going to make the observation, it's not a felony, and that's always been a complication in this process, which is that violating the immigration statutes is not criminal, and could get changed down the road, but that's not where it is right now.
Well, thank you for correcting me.
So, no, I was just going to say, I think the bigger issue needs to be and continues to be one of due process. Whether or not this is the poster child for that, I think remains to be seen. But I think that we need to focus on the lack of due processes taking place under this administration, and we need to find real examples. I think the fact that they acknowledge inadvertently that this was an error or a mistake, I think people saw as an opportunity to kind of run and make big hay with this one. But I think the due process piece is critical, and I think that people's rights are being trampled on.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you both. Great discussion. When we come back, parting shots. Welcome back. Now with parting shots, Mike Knapp.
Thank you, Casey. I want to acknowledge the passing of the matriarch of Montgomery County in Quince Orchard, Ms. Pearl Green. Pearl Green passed away this past week at the age of 106, 2 months shy of her 107th birthday. Her family settled the Quince Orchard community, and her family has been working to restore the Pleasant View Historic Site, which contains Quince Orchard Colored School and Pleasant View Methodist Episcopal Church. And her family, she is the granddaughter of slaves, having grown up in Montgomery County, and her life is a true living legacy and one that we should recognize and cherish.
Thank you, Mike. Mark Uncapher, your parting shot.
Well, one of the provisions of the comprehensive energy bill that was passed by the legislature is a provision that overrides local zoning requirements in areas like the agriculture reserve. So it's worth having a conversation if you're going to industrialize the ag reserve with solar panels. Perhaps it's time to take a look at thinking about housing.
Mark, you said the magic word. I love it. Anyway, I want to thank you both for appearing here today. And I just want to remind the audience, a year before the Declaration of Independence was signed was the Battle of Lexington and Concord, we just celebrated the 250th anniversary of that incredible feat. And so I want to remember, it's special to be an American. And I want to thank you for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 This Week, I'm Casey Aiken.